The oil shock in 2026 is about to hit America. And the stupidest thing people are doing right now is treating this like it's just a gas price story. It's not. This is a cost of living crisis. It hits food, it hits freight, it hits inflation, it hits debt, and it lands on a country where a lot of people were already barely holding it together. That's what makes this dangerous. Not just higher oil on top of a system that was already weaker than it looked. Quick favor before we go deeper. I'm a small new YouTuber, and if you like these straight, plain English breakdowns, hit subscribe. It helps YouTube push this to more people who actually want the real story. Oil is not just what you pump into your car. It moves trucks, it moves ships, it moves planes. It helps make fertilizer. It helps move food. It sits underneath a huge chunk of the economy. So when oil gets hit hard enough, this doesn't stay in one lane. It leaks into everything. That's the mistake people keep making. They hear oil shock and think annoying gas prices, a few ugly headlines, maybe some temporary pain. No, this is not just an energy story. It's an oil shock turning into a cost of living crisis. And it's hitting an economy where a lot of people already feel stretched, angry, and one bill away from falling behind. So another input shock doesn't just hurt, it compounds. Transport gets more expensive, goods get more expensive, food gets more expensive. Businesses with thin margins get squeezed. Inflation gets harder to cool down. Rates stay higher for longer. Debt gets heavier. And that's why the America is energy independent so relax line is nothing but political bullshit. Because prices do not live in some sealed patriotic bubble. Pricing is global. Freight is global. Supply chains are global. Inflation psychology is global. So no, America is not magically insulated just because somebody says we produce a lot of energy. And we need to stop talking about this like it's some future possibility. For a lot of the world, the shock is already here. Offices are already cutting back. Work from home orders are already being used to save fuel. Travel is already being limited. Fuel is already being rationed. And in parts of Asia and Africa, daily life is already being rearranged around the shortage. That matters because this is not just an oil story. Once fuel gets hit hard enough, it starts moving through everything else. Freight gets more expensive, food gets harder to move, fertilizer gets more expensive, and countries that were already fragile get hit first. So no, this is not maybe someday. The disruption has already started. The only question now is how far it spreads, how long it lasts, and how much worse it gets by the time America really feels it. And there's another path here that people really do not want to think about. Because if this oil shock keeps spreading, and it hits a weak consumer, and it lands while massive layoffs are already happening, then this does not stop at recession. There is a version of this that starts looking a lot more like a global depression. And yeah, that sounds extreme. But look at the setup. Energy gets more expensive. Food gets more expensive. Transport gets more expensive. Debt stays heavy. And right on top of all of that, job security is already breaking down. Not might, already. Layoffs are already happening. Labor is already being cut. People are already being pushed into contract work. Payrolls are already being thinned out in the name of efficiency. And Goldman Sachs is already warning that higher oil prices could shave about 10,000 jobs a month off US payroll growth. So this isn't just another annoying price spike. It's an oil shock accelerating weakness that was already there. That's what makes this so ugly. Because now you're not just dealing with one hit, you're dealing with both sides of the squeeze at the same time. Higher costs on one end, weaker job security on the other. And if this keeps accelerating, then recession 2026 stops sounding like a warning and starts sounding like the direction we're already moving in. Because once people are getting hit by both at once, they stop living like consumers and start living like survivors. They cut back, they delay purchases, they stop taking risks, they pull in, and once enough people start pulling in at the same time, the whole machine starts slowing down hard. That's when all the fake "maybe this is temporary" language starts sounding stupid. Because at that point, it's not temporary pain, it's shutdown behavior. And you can already see the stress showing up in basic survival behavior. Food bank use is rising because for a growing number of people, this is not about cutting back on luxuries anymore. It is about running out of room on the basics. And that's also where the market story starts getting weird. Because the market keeps acting like this is manageable. Maybe it's noise. Maybe it's temporary. Maybe the system absorbs it. Maybe. But history on oil shocks is ugly enough that pretending calm is not the same thing as being safe. Because every time energy gets hit hard enough, it finds the weak spots fast. And America has plenty of weak spots right now. Consumers are weaker than the chart wants to admit. Housing is already strained. Debt is heavy. Confidence is shaky. And the whole system still feels like it's being held together by people spending money they do not really have in an economy they do not really trust. That is not the kind of economy you want taking another hit to a basic input. And oil is about as basic as it gets. That's why this is bigger than gasoline. It's not just a price spike, it's a pressure wave. And pressure waves move through everything. Food, freight, travel, manufacturing, fertilizer, household budgets, business margins. Normal people have to live inside that. That's the split. And that's why this is dangerous. Not because gas gets annoying, because another affordability shock is hitting people who are already out of room. So the real question becomes, what do you actually do with that? Not in some bunker fantasy way, just practically. First, treat this like a cash flow problem, not just a market story. Look hard at what in your life gets worse if energy jumps. Fuel, groceries, commute, utilities, delivery costs. Second, get honest about fixed obligations, monthly payments, debt, bills that do not care if life gets harder. Fragility gets punished fast in a shock. Third, keep more breathing room than you think you need. Not because cash is exciting, because flexibility matters when prices jump and job security gets worse at the same time. And if this keeps getting worse, some people are going to start looking outside the usual US story for stability. That could mean more cash, shorter duration bonds, or even looking at sovereign debt outside the US, including places like China. Not because those trades are simple, and definitely not because this is financial advice, but because when debt stress, energy shock, and inflation pressure start stacking up at home, people start looking for anywhere that feels less exposed to the same pileup. And fourth, stop building your whole life around the assumption that next month will look basically like this month. That's how people get blindsided. Periods like this punish overexposure. So think less about upside and more about reducing vulnerability. Fewer points of failure, more flexibility, less dependence on everything going right. That does not mean panic. Those are not the same thing. Because if this really is becoming an oil shock on top of a weak consumer, on top of layoffs that are already here, then the problem is not one number. It's the pileup. And pileups are what break systems. That's why I think this matters more than people want to admit. Not because gas gets annoying, because the whole economy is a lot less shock-proof than it looks. And when physical reality wins, people won't experience it as an oil story. They'll experience it as everything just got harder again.